What is going on YouTube? Joshua Wade here, and this is my first podcast, first of hopefully many, and this is a series that I'm going to do pretty much slightly offensive DAW talk, right? And I'm not going to hold any punches on this. These are just my opinions, but I do have a little paper here with bullet points, and for those of you who can't see me and you're only listening to the podcast as podcasts go, I'll do my best to describe what I'm doing on camera. But I've got my bullet points here, and there's only 5 of them, so this podcast isn't going to be very long. But the first one is going to be Presonus sucks. That's my first bullet point, right? And I'm basically just going to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes bashing Studio One and what I don't like about it. But stick with me here, folks. Stick with me. Number 2, we're going to talk about the Fender acquisition of Presonus, the Fender buyout, and kind of attached to that is the push for subscriptions. They seem to be pushing more for subscriptions than they do for people to just use it or people to just buy it outright. They almost make it impossible to buy it, and we'll get onto that. Number 3 is going to be who uses it, right? What type of creator or producer, mixing engineer uses it. Number 4 would be better options, other DAWs out there that do the same thing or maybe something a little better. And then finally on number 5, I'm actually going to end it on a good note, and I'm going to say good things about Presonus' Studio One because overall, I do think it's a great DAW, and I used it for years. I probably used it as my primary DAW for 5 or 6 years before I switched over to Logic Pro. And I'm actually trying a different DAW right now that I'm really digging also, but we'll get into that in a minute. So the first one, Presonus sucks. I switched from Pro Tools probably 7 or 8 years ago. I switched to Presonus Studio One, and at that time it was version 3. So my timelines might be a little weird. It's because I'm not really good with timelines. But whenever 3 was the big thing, that's when I left Pro Tools and went to Studio One full time. I thought it was an amazing DAW, and it did kind of remind me of Pro Tools in a way. It was comfortable to me, if that makes sense. So I stuck with it. It took about a year, but eventually Pro Tools wasn't even installed on my system. And this was before the time of Pro Tools, just going subscription based. You could only buy Studio One. They had no subscription. Sphere wasn't a thing yet for another couple years or another few years. And Pro Tools hadn't done the subscription thing yet either. You could still buy a perpetual license of Pro Tools. So I had one and I never used it. I switched to Studio One. By version 4, I realized I wanted the professional because I was using the one under it. And I spent $400 on Presonus Studio One Professional version 4. So when 5 come out, it was only $150 for me to upgrade. And again, this Sphere wasn't around yet. Sphere was not a thing yet. So I went ahead and I paid the $150 for the upgrade because from 4 to 5, they gave you a lot of extra stuff. I mean, it was still lacking some things that other DAWs had for a while at the time, but it gave me enough. I felt like $150, what the hell, I'm going to upgrade to that. It's worth it for me. But I think the reason, and here comes the bashing part, right? I think they are not giving you enough for your money. For the Sphere is what, $15 a month? I don't think it's worth it. Like people argue all the time with me on my YouTube channel. I posted a video on my YouTube, 2 videos actually, and they've gotten combined over 10,000 views. That's not a lot for some people, but it's a lot for me because, I'm a small channel. I've got just over 2,500 subscribers. People were calling me a narcissist and everything else because I was giving them crap about coming out with a dynamic EQ and then not giving you the ability to mid-side it. It's not a mid-side EQ. It took them forever to give us a de-esser. Other DAWs have had de-essers. The most basic of recording programs have had de-essers for a long time now. And then Presonus comes out, and they released version 6, and you guys can't see, if you can't see me, I'm doing the little air quotes, version 6, which we got more with the point update. When they went to 5.4 or 5.2, whichever one it was, we got more features out of a point update than we did switching to a version 6. So I think Presonus is definitely showing, and here we go, the segue into the Fender acquisition. I think the CEO of Fender is definitely messing up big time. And he said something, and I'll normalize the audio in this because I just realized I was peaking a little bit. Sorry about that. He said in an article, he said he wanted to try to make Studio One easier to use. And I brought that up to a couple producer friends of mine, and they just kind of looked at me and they're like, well, it was already easy to use for us. You know, we're, I guess what you would call power users. We use this program all the time. At the time I was, still pretty much on Studio One. I started using Logic Pro about a year ago, but Studio One was still, it was still on my dock. I still used it for projects and for client mixes and stuff like that. I would just kind of go back and forth from Logic to Studio One, depending on what I was doing. But after just a couple of things that they were doing, I just did not like the whole thing. They make it damn near impossible to buy Studio One if you go in, because they're pushing so hard for that Adobe Atmosphere, subscription-based model bullshit. I can't stand that they're pushing that. Now, don't get me wrong. I really do like that they give you the option still. You can still buy it outright if you want to, and you can subscribe to Sphere if you want to. Then they try to tell, so I like that, but then they try to tell you, oh yeah, with Sphere, you've got all these different sounds and all these different plugins. First of all, the sounds are trash. And if you think they're good, you haven't found good samples yet or good sounds yet. The synthesizer sucks. The drum sounds are garbage. This is the bashing part I was telling you about. The sounds are trash. And then every time Sphere comes out with a new pack, right, a new add-on pack, I go through and I listen to it. I get my hopes up because the artwork is pretty cool on it. And then I click it and scan through the sounds, and they're still trash. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to use my own stuff anyway. So it's pretty bad when I was the biggest fanboy of Studio One, and I will not even look at their stock plugins. I will, now okay, let me take that back. Their stock plugins are okay. I think the EQ is okay. The compressor is okay. Even the fat channel stuff is not bad. It's pretty good. They've got some really cool emulations of like the Pultec stuff and things like that. And there's a nice LA2A and 1176 emulation on there. Those are not bad, but that's not enough. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, we're at the point in Studio One to where they're not bringing anything new and innovative to the table. And now that Fender has bought them, I think they're going to go the way that Gibson did with Sonar. And if you guys don't know about Sonar, Cakewalk, BandLab, right? Cakewalk by BandLab used to be, Cakewalk was the company and Sonar was the recording program. And I don't mean the BandLab, that's the online one that you can go and use on your web browser. They have a free version that's actually not bad. It used to be called Sonar by Cakewalk, the company, and then Gibson bought Cakewalk, and then Gibson pretty much depleted all of the money out of that thing, and then they shut the program down, and then BandLab took over the name, which is awesome of them because then they give it to you for free as long as you have a Windows PC. Check it out. It's worth it. I think Fender's going to do the same thing with Presonus, Studio One. I think Fender mainly bought Presonus more so for the hardware because they wanted to get into like the mixers, the live mixers they have and stuff like that, because they do have badass hardware. I will say that about Presonus also. Their interfaces are really good. Their mixers are really good. I just kind of always, Studio One has been kind of like an afterthought of it. It seems like, to me anyway. So let's see here. All right, the Fender buyout, who actually uses it. So in my experience, the people who use Studio One the most are people that are coming from Pro Tools, right? Or are people who have never recorded at all and they see that Sphere badge and they're like, oh, it's only $15 a month. I'm going to go ahead and get that. Those are the people that I notice mainly using Studio One. Any professional that I've seen that's using it, 99% of the time, they're like, well, yeah, I was using Pro Tools, but Studio One reminded me of Pro Tools in the way that it routes audio and everything, but it's better because Pro Tools freaking sucks. The fact that it's the industry standard, we don't even get started on that. I hate that term, first of all, industry standard. I hate that term. Industry leading, I can handle, but industry standard, Pro Tools is trash, and it has been for a decade. But that's for another video that I have coming out next week, by the way. So who uses it? Now, like I said, I have producer friends who use it. We all had Pro Tools back in the day. We all switched over to Studio One. Most of us did. And it was great. Like, Studio One, I think, is great, but for me, I don't use it anymore. It's not even installed on my computer, on any of my computers. I don't use it anymore because it does what everyone else does, but like it doesn't do one thing awesome. Does that make sense? It's like that cousin in the family who's pretty good at a lot of things, but not really good at anything, if that makes sense. That's kind of, especially for me, my style of production is more so I deal with artists who make beats. So, hip hop, rap, pop music, stuff like that. I've been dealing with a lot of that kind of stuff. And for a composer for beats, things like that, it just doesn't offer enough. Like the step sequencer that it comes with is crap. I don't think the MIDI features are on par with other DAWs out there. Like Ableton's MIDI is awesome. FL Studio, one of the best MIDI editors in the game, right? I don't think Studio One really gives a crap about us producers like that who deal with MIDI a lot. You can obviously tell they are very, very audio oriented. Again, so many people go from Pro Tools to Studio One. I think that is pretty much their demographic, right? That's their market. They want to catch the Pro Tools people, which is hilarious because that's not hard to do. The most basic DAWs do more than Pro Tools does. But again, that's going to be for next week's podcast. I'm going to bash on some Pro Tools a little bit. So better options. So we're on number 4. So I've covered the Presonus sucks. And again, on the 5th bullet point, I'll tell you why they're really, actually, it's not a bad DAW. Who uses it? We went over that. People who had Pro Tools and are comfortable with Pro Tools switched over to it. You see a lot of people doing that. Better options. So I think, and this is, again, my opinion, right? Take it for what it's worth. Your better options, if you're coming from Pro Tools, depends on what DAW you're coming from, right? If you're coming from Pro Tools, any option is better for you. Just do yourself a favor. Stop giving Avid your money. They don't care about you. They don't care about their customers. They haven't innovated anything in over 15 years. Just switch to any other DAW, right? I have been messing around with Cubase, believe it or not. That's right. That's a DAW that everyone's kind of slept on for the past, 10, 12 years because it's just so old. It's one of the OG DAWs. It's actually got a lot of modern features in it. And if you like the chord track on Studio One, check out Cubase's chord track. It will make Studio One's look like a Fisher-Price toy. Like seriously, the chord track on it. And that's one of my favorite features of Studio One was the chord track. Cubase is miles ahead of Presonus for the chord track and just MIDI in general. I think Cubase has one of the better MIDI editors. It's definitely up there, if not surpasses FL Studio, in my opinion. And that's saying a lot because I respect FL Studio for the stuff that it can do. So here we go. The good stuff, right? The good stuff. Well, no, let's go back to better options here. What are we at? What am I at? I'm at 13 minutes for this podcast. No, we got to hit at least 20 minutes. Come on. I can talk a lot more trash than that. 13 minutes worth. Come on. So better options. Obviously, I'm a Logic user, but I don't like to pigeonhole people into just getting a Mac, even though Macs are the best for audio. That can be another video too. Go ahead and comment wherever you can on a podcast. I don't know if you can or not, but Macs are just better for audio. They just are. They're not really good at anything else. PC's better at everything else, but Mac has audio, and that's all I care about right now. Better options, I would say, if you're coming from Pro Tools, I would check out, as much as I hate to say it, Reaper. And I would recommend Reaper if you're someone who has a lot of third-party virtual instruments and third-party plugins that you like to use. Check out Reaper. It's actually a pretty powerful DAW for just raw audio editing. It doesn't offer anything else. It doesn't give you any plugins worth of shit. It doesn't give you any virtual instruments worth of shit. So check it out if you're just looking for something to edit audio, edit, mix, and master audio. It does have some really cool stuff. And it does have ARA2, right? ARA2, audio random access, which Presonus, hey, thank you for that. By the way, they were one of the pioneers of ARA. So there's the first good thing on the next part of the chat, on the next bullet point here. Yeah, better options. I would say for both platforms, Windows and Mac, I would say Cubase is really cool, but they don't have a subscription model, so you got to buy it outright. But they do give you a 60-day trial, a full, like there's no limitations on the software. You get full 60 days. And they do have different versions that you can buy. You don't have to get Cubase Pro. That's the one I'm using currently. But you don't have to get that. They start at, I think, $100 like every other DAW, and they just kind of go up from there. So yeah, I would say check out Reaper if you're coming from Pro Tools. If you're at Studio One right now currently, right? If you're using Studio One and you're like, what else is out there? Well, I had mentioned Cubase again. Sorry for sounding like a broken record, but it really has impressed me. It's got all the stuff that Studio One has, but like better virtual instruments, better MIDI features. And in what I've seen so far, I've only been messing around with Cubase for a couple of weeks, but I used Studio One for almost 6 years. It's for over 6 years. So let's see here. Okay, the good stuff about Studio One, and I just smacked the microphone. Sorry about that. The good stuff about Studio One. It is overall a very powerful DAW. It really is. Again, if you're coming from Pro Tools or that's about it. That's the only one I can think of. If you're coming from Pro Tools and get Studio One, you'll be very happy with your decision to switch over. And I do like the stock compressors that it comes with, even if you don't have the professional version. Like if you have Sphere, you have everything, right? You have all their plugins. The Fat Channel is cool. I really like the integration with their interfaces. If you have a Presonus interface, which I had mentioned before, Presonus makes really good hardware. That is one thing. I can trash talk some things about Studio One, but I cannot trash talk Presonus's hardware. It's been good for years, and it still is good. I always recommend their interfaces, like the Audio Box 96 and stuff like that, even the older ones. I still recommend those to people because they work really well, plug and play. But yeah, the newer interfaces, I've had a couple of them. They integrate really well into Studio One. If you have like what is the little pad that they have, and I've owned both of them, and I can't even remember it. Can't remember the name of the pad. Their MIDI controller integrates really well. The Fader Port series integrates really well into Studio One. The Fader Port series you can use on any DAW, and it works really well with every DAW that I know of. But just that level of integration, and I do like clip or envelope gain. I've talked about that before, and their chord track is good. I was giving it crap earlier because Cubase is miles ahead of their chord track, but they have a chord track. And back to an integration thing, most DAWs have ARA, right? Studio One's ARA with Melodyne is, I have not seen anyone, including Cubase, do it as well as Studio One does it. So that's one thing that I definitely miss about Studio One is the ARA integration, because I use Melodyne often, not just for vocals. I actually mainly use it for instrument correction and stuff like that. And, because it's monophonic and polyphonic. So now that's the other thing with Cubase. It's only, their pitch correction is very close to Melodyne, but it only has the one algorithm. It only has the monophonic. So I still use Melodyne inside of Cubase, which Cubase is ARA, but back to Presonus, they're one of the innovators of that. They worked out a thing with Melodyne to come out with ARA, so Melodyne would integrate into Studio One flawlessly, and it really does. It's really seamless. The good stuff also, and this comes back to, is kind of contradicting myself here, but the subscription. I think it's actually a cool thing if they will keep the option to purchase the software. I like the fact that they offer a subscription model to try it out. And there's no year contract. You pay the $15. You can do it month to month. You can pay $15, and they make it, I will say this, they make it really easy to cancel your subscription. You can just go into your Presonus account and you can hit cancel, and it will tell you it is canceled. And I have done this 4 or 5 times. Because I still have a lot of clients who work with Studio One. And again, it's just much easier for them to send me their sessions. I haven't had to in a while, so I don't have Studio One installed on my computer right now. But if it did come down to it, I know it's going to be easy for me to just resubscribe, pay the $15, do the project, take care of the project, export everything, save everything, and then hit the unsubscribe button. And they will not bill me. They have never billed me for something I didn't ask for. So I think that's really cool. What I think will be the end of Studio One for me, right? Personally, I mean, I already don't use it. I've already said that, but what I think will be the end for a lot of people that are similar to myself who come from Pro Tools and are still on Studio One and are happy with Studio One. That's awesome. Stick with what you like and what works for you. Is if they switch over to that Adobe bullshit only subscription without really giving you any extra features, right? And Presonus, you're going to have to come correct with better sounds because your sounds are trash. I watched a video on the stock electric bass guitar in Studio One on how to make it sound real. I seriously was at my wit's end here, and because a friend of mine has Studio One, and she's like, "Hey, what can I use that's a real bass guitar?" So I don't know. I use my own virtual instruments for bass guitar emulation, right? So I'm like, well, here, let me look it up and see if I can find something for you. The first video I found was how to make Presonus's bass sound real, right? Studio One's bass guitar sound real. The first thing the guy said was put reverb on it. We're going to start out with putting reverb on it. That doesn't make it sound real. It still makes it sound like ass, but ass with reverb on it. So you guys, Presonus, Fender, come on, Fender, come off of that wall a little bit. Stop changing the user interface, making it easier to use when it was already easy to use in the first place. Actually give us some shit that we can use, like real bass sounds, real drum sounds. Your acoustic drum kits are garbage. Wait, this was supposed to be the good part, right? So the good stuff about Presonus' Studio One is you can pay $15, you can finish your project, and then you can hit the cancel button, and you can guarantee that Presonus will cancel your subscription. They've never charged me for something I didn't ask for. But that's going to be the end of this podcast. And I didn't talk too much shit about Presonus. Trust me, as much as I wanted to, as much as I was frustrated when I was watching the opening video when they announced Studio One version 6, and I did the little air quotes again for those of you listening because it's not a version 6 to me. It's like a 0.1 upgrade because we give you a de-esser and a dynamic EQ. Congratulations. The dynamic EQ doesn't do mid-side, and the de-esser is something we should have had 7 years ago. So thank you for that. But it's awesome. Studio One is great. But that's going to do it for this podcast, guys. This is my first one, so I apologize for the level of amateur. But I will be doing some more. If you guys have any comments or if you want to be featured in one of these, maybe, I don't know. Let's get some of your thoughts and opinions about different DAWs, because I'm not only going to trash talk Presonus Studio One, I'm going to trash talk the DAW that I use every day, which is Logic Pro, because trust me, there are many things I can say about it that are not on the positive side, but there are positive things I can say about it too. Obviously, I use it every day for my workflow. And also Cubase. I'm going to be bringing Cubase up a little more in this one because it's a pretty cool DAW. I don't know enough about it to trash talk it or to build it up just yet, but yeah, we'll get there. But yeah, all right, guys. Hopefully you have this is a Wednesday. Hopefully you have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you in the next podcast. Have a good one.